BeTheTalk, episode 355, featuring Chad Littlefield. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Chad Littlefield. Chad, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready to talk and perhaps listen.
Chad Littlefield is the co-founder of Me and We Inc., an organization whose mission is to gently eradicate small talk to create conversations that matter. Forbes magazine calls Chad a global expert on building trust and connection in teams. Chad Littlefield, welcome to the talk.
Thanks for having me.
Your talk is called Positive Social Risks. And this is one of the shortest talks that I've ever seen. It clocked in at just over 6 minutes and ends very interestingly because you basically have the crowd buzzing and then it just kind of fades out, which is a unique ending as well. It makes sense because they actually did what you describe in the talk. They began connecting with one another. So please, Chad, take us behind the talk.
Yeah. Wow. So this is good to rewind the tape a little bit.
It's been a while ago. So that's a little summary of your talk.
It's about a fifth year anniversary or so.
Yeah.
But in that moment, it's interesting. Behind stage, the 10 seconds before I went on, I would say, despite the fact when you watch the video, I look very comfortable hanging out with those 800 people. But it was probably the time that I was most choicefully nervous in my entire life in that exact moment. And I wish that Apple Watches were out back then and I could prove it to people that I was nervous because they don't believe me when I share that. But part of the desire and what you're talking about in terms of how we're ending is the talks inviting people to shift a pattern of behavior or try something that stretches people outside of where they're comfortable. And as many TED Talks do. And I don't think that I could ask people of that without actually doing it in the room as an experiential educator, somebody who thinks that we learn by doing rather than just by listening.
Chad, we're going to get into some other areas, especially this introvert extrovert thing. But I'm really curious about your gestures because in the talk, you had the most. I've interviewed 350 plus people on this podcast the entire year 2018. You have the most, I think, intentionally exaggerated gestures of anyone I've ever seen. Have you found that kind of opens people up? Does that get them to lean in? Does that get you to, get their judger out and either give you a thumbs up or thumbs down as opposed to just checking out? Why do you do it that way?
Yeah, well, I appreciate your reflection of that. I almost failed public speaking in college because my instructor was not happy with the way he wanted me to use my hands as batons and very deliberately. And people who know me personally know that those exaggerated gestures are actually more genuine than exaggerated. Now, when I'm speaking, there is a performance aspect of I'm performing to the person in the back row. And so if they can see the energy that comes out through my gestures, then it connects me with everyone, not just the front row. So that's one intention. The other one is I cannot actually help it. I don't map out my gestures. I don't, it probably should be more deliberate actually, because I think sometimes, if I'm trying a new talk and it's less practiced, it could become distracting. But I think for most people, I get quite a bit of positive feedback, thumbs up most of the time.
So really, the beginning of that, it does have something to do with projection and stagecraft a little bit because you are trying to reach that person in the back row.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% of the time that I speak anywhere, somebody comes up to me and verbatim says, "Oh, Chad, I just love your energy." And I was like, that actually used to really tick me off because I was like, this isn't helpful feedback. What does that even mean? And what I realized is actually it's a gift that they're giving me. It's a compliment, an affirmation. And I think it's in part because of those gestures. I put how I feel inside and translate it into how my body's moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me, you're walking out on stage and you're making yourself extra vulnerable because the gestures are extra big and that could be an extra target Or we can lean in and really listen to the substance. The question is, okay, is there real substance behind the gestures, or is it just gestures for the point of doing something different? And there is a substance. And we were talking a little bit in the pre-interview, Chad, about, this is beautiful because your talk is all about opening people up and connecting in a meaningful way. And I would suspect you're a little bit more naturally on the extroverted area of the spectrum. And, believe it or not, I'm more of an introvert, and I've got a couple of introverts lined up later in the day. And this is common ground because the introverts judge the extroverts and think that small talk is where it's at in party conversations, but you're not like that. You're actually aligning and allying with all of us introverts to create meaningful connections so that we can, make a difference and make an impact. So I love that. Please tell us a little bit more about your approach.
Yeah. So, for those of you familiar with Susan Cain, who's a pretty famous, TED talker, popular TED talker, talks about the power of introverts in a world that cannot stop talking. And she is somebody that I follow most as somebody who tends to be extroverted. She's somebody who I follow most closely, actually, because I think she speaks so much truth and power to that world. And there's things you can contest with, but overall, one of the things that she really shares, and this is a generalization of introverts, but I have met, and I actually have been doing some research on this, asking people as I go around and speak, how many of you really so I was in Texas a couple weeks ago asking a group of 1,500 people. I said, how many of you really love small talk as you define it right now? And there were 2 hands in the room that went up at a 1,500. And so it's great. You guys chat with each other. That's wonderful. And for the 1,498 others of you in the room, we're going to do an experiment that's going to create that conversation that matters. So when you point out that elephant in the room and then you create an opportunity to skip that and have a conversation that's a little bit more meaningful, there's something really freeing for introverts. And somebody always comes up after a talk. My favorite thing is an introvert always comes up afterwards, and the first thing they say is this big sigh. They say, "Oh, you have no idea. I'm so introverted. When you got up and you said you were going to get us into conversations, I was mortified. And by the end, I was so grateful because you made it so easy and you assumed the social risk for me to be able to have conversations that I actually cared about without needing to navigate the where are you from geography game."
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what good leaders of groups and communities and teams, that's what they do. They create an environment where we're not battling against one another's differences as you kind of do by default, but you can pick out a neutral common enemy, which in our case is shallow, meaningless conversations. And that's a wonderful thing when you've got someone more on the extrovert spectrum saying, you know what, we don't like meaningless conversations either. We want to really connect, and we connect in a certain way. And if you can meet in common ground, I love that. 1,500 people in the room and only 2 people actually loved the shallow, meaningless talk piece.
and that wasn't just that random group. Every group numbers are very similar. It's always a 99% to 1%.
It's like a 99.9. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something. And then maybe do you applaud the 2 people that actually like that? I mean, that's good that they like it. I guess they need their own community if there's only 2 of them.
Right. Well, I think actually whenever I talk with somebody who says, no, whoa, I really love small talk, the way that they describe small talk is they're really genuinely, naturally curious about another person. They're really listening to what they have to say. And I don't actually think that small talk has anything to do with the content of the conversation. I think it has to do with the process. So when 2 people care to talk to each other, I think it's actually really hard when there's empathetic curiosity present in the conversation. I don't think it's possible to have a conversation that's small talk if you have that mutual empathetic curiosity.
And that's really what we get out of your talk, because now, and 5 years later or however long it's been, now we've got these screens and we've got, our heads are even more in our phones, and it's even harder to connect. So really your talk is about, just validating the humanity in other people while we're still barely human, before we go even further off the cliff. And it's actually very, very meaningful. And so, good for you for creating the credibility to expose this little shallow small talk thing, and then to bring the bigger point that introverts also need to hear. I'm going to pick on fellow introverts. We need to get out of our shells, and we need to acknowledge and reach out and give to other people who may be even more, introverted or fearful or isolated than we are ourselves. And that is a necessary, empowering message right there. So now you've got some tools. So you were showing me some tools that you have. You actually have practical tools for those of us watching the live stream right now. If you can show that to us, because you got some groovy stuff.
Thanks. Yeah. So, this one deck, this is the one that's most popular. This is being used in 80 countries around the world. It's called We Connect cards.
80. And not 18, but
80. Yes.
Wow.
Just shipped some decks off to, the UAE and Philippines and Switzerland yesterday.
How many languages of those 80 countries? English or other ones as well?
Say that again?
Other languages besides English, or?
So we're currently working on a global translations project. They're in about 6 languages, not in print. Digitally, they're in about 6 languages. Yeah.
And you download and go or something like that?
Yeah. Okay. Similar to that. So anybody's interested in different language can reach out. But we actually, back when I was an academic, I used the design thinking process to really create 60 questions, because there are other question decks out there, and a lot of them actually promote small talk, I think. They're silly, quite like, what's your favorite color M&M? And when we do quote icebreakers in organizations or meeting contexts, so often it's like this painful drudgery. Like icebreaker triggers a lot of people, like, oh, not that. And so
because it's code language for more corporate drudgery, disguised with a shiny red bow that nobody really wants to do anymore.
Totally.
Or it's like a Michael Scott Office episode where something very wrong and very inappropriate is about to happen in a corporate setting.
Exactly. And so seeing those two problems, I was like, okay, this cannot go on in the world. There needs to be a better tool. So
I love this. This is so cause driven.
Yeah, there's the original spark for the idea of We Connect cards in particular was seeing two people interact without prompting, just watching, say in a context of a networking event. A networking event most of the time looks like a bunch of slow bumper cars who happen to collide, don't really know what to do, know they're going to not be there for too long. So how deep do you really, like, it's painful to watch. And so I wanted to reduce that pain.
Thank you.
And replace it with something that was actually really connecting, really meaningful. Because we know there's so much. I don't know if you saw Google's recent study, Project Aristotle, that came out of, they went on this quest to find what are the characteristics of the highest performing teams at Google. And the number one characteristic that kicked out was not the perfect Myers-Briggs. It wasn't the years of experience. It was the degree of psychological safety in that team.
I saw something about that. I remember that now. Didn't remember it Google, but psychological safety, which is actually really hard. If you're a leader, if you're a manager, and you've got like and I'm not the biggest believer in Myers-Briggs, but it's great for purposes of conversation. I am actually an INFP, which means, and I've got kind of the firstborn child sensibility where I'm kind of almost allied with other people and leaders against my own fundamental nature, which is very, very sensitive. And so it's like, how do you get things done? Get everybody working together, and also value people that are hidden secretly, kind of like me, and kind of easily shut down. I wouldn't say offended, because I work really hard at not doing that, but easily kind of shut down on the inside. Absolutely heroic to be able to have a team like that. Actually, sure.
Your talk at TEDx Harrisburg was about empathy. And so I'm curious for you. I think that a huge component of psychological safety is group empathy and being trained in empathy. I'm wondering what, for folks listening, what is something that in your brain creates that shared empathy or that psychological safety?
Well, you have to identify with the other person. You have to basically walk a mile in their shoes. My whole thing was about being armed. ARM. The first one is to assume noble intent, which isn't easy to do when you've got deadlines and pressure and, your chain of command coming down on you. But I think that's really key to psychological safety, is just always, no matter how much pressure you're shouldering and shielding the group from, if you can just always assume noble intent and then, speak in a direct way and, and just let people know that they're valued. I think that's huge.
Wow. I need to you need to give me your address after this.
Well, you'll hear it on the podcast because my Talk Ninja, he's not going to edit that part out.
Oh, no. I'm not suggesting you give me your address now. No. That would be a poor decision. Afterward, you'll have to send me. I'd love to get you a copy of Ask Powerful Questions. The first chapter is about intent and the last chapter is about empathy.
There you go. Well, we bookended it right there. So that's the one that you worked on with your partner. What was the solo one? And you've got a whole bunch of these things in your store, and I'm going to let people know where that is later on.
Everything combined into a connection toolkit with 100 different group exercises and multiple tools in it. The book that I just mentioned is primarily written by my partner, Will Wise, called Ask Powerful Questions. Create Conversations That Matter, which, much to our happy surprise, became a Amazon bestseller and got out there. I don't know how many countries that one's in, but it's gotten to more. And then I, before that, produced a more practical pocket-sized guide. So if you're on the podcast, it is literally the size of a pocket, size of an index card. Little 140-page, very practical, exercise-based book called The Pocket Guide to Facilitating Human Connections.
It'll definitely fit in your pocket. So we've been enjoying our talk with Chad Littlefield. His talk is called Positive Social Risks. And like the Pocket Guide, it is a short one. So we are going to come right back in just a moment for the Blitz Round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And we're back with Chad Littlefield. It is time for the Blitz Round. I'm going to ask Chad a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of his recent talk. Chad, are you ready to go?
My neurons are primed.
First question, were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I was invited to host, and I said, no, thank you. And when I said no, thank you, I said, okay, we'd love for you to give a talk.
Invited to host. So as a sponsor, as a venue, as an MC, what does that mean?
As an MC.
As an MC. Okay. Well, that's a separate fun conversation. Have you MC'd other TEDx talks or other venues? Obviously done quite a bit of that.
Since then, I will MC quite a bit of corporate events and kind of thread the needle between whether it be a larger company retreat or an all staff weekend getaway or something. But I like being able to tie the thread and the theme and weave the theme of connection throughout sometimes boring business meetings.
Well, for Chad's benefit, so this is the automatic invite right back on to talk about MCing, because I love talking to other MCs because people don't really talk or hear about it. You can hear several episodes on Be the Talk where I've talked with other MCs, because that's just kind of a mysterious, not very tangible art that is extremely important if you're getting married or having a reception or doing your own business event or doing anything like that. It's very, very important. But back to the Blitz Round. Chad, are you a memorizer, improviser, or a blender?
I memorized it so much that I threw the whole thing aside and I got on with a blank slate. And so it was in my body by the time I stepped on, but I don't think I had a word of it in my head.
Yeah. So I almost think I need to add a fourth word, internalizer, because that's when you can jump on and that's when the magic happens. If you don't memorize it quite well enough, you're not an internalizer. You're, I don't know what that is, but that's you've had an experience. You've learned something. We'll say it that way. Yeah. Chad, what is a tip, tool, or technique that helped you?
So if you see the talk, I use visual space a lot. And so I actually have a series of boxes set up on the stage to form a wall, and I use a hoop to represent these 3 different zones that I'm talking about. And as I'm talking, I move through those zones, and our puny little 8-pound blocks, can only take in so much information. And if you chunk it together, it helps. And so I try to really chunk it by space. So when I talked about comfort zone, I was standing inside that hoop. When I talked about the anxious bump, I was stepping over the box wall that was supposed to represent that. So use space and be visual, not on a PowerPoint, would be the takeaway.
Chad, what was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
Well, all speakers know the green room is the most high anxiety place on the planet. Like green rooms need to be the opposite of open offices, right? They need like walls with their own little space so that other people's anxiety doesn't leak onto yours. I would say afterward, I had somebody come up to me and share this, and it's confidential enough that I don't actually feel comfortable sharing. But essentially, they said, I have lived my life for the past 18 years with intense social anxiety. And in this talk, you actually, at the end, you got us to interact and connect, and your framing has completely shifted my view. And I can't explain it, but that anxiety that I've felt for the last 18 years feels lifted.
Wow.
6 minutes.
Powerful stuff. We've been enjoying our Blitz round with Chad Littlefield. His talk is called Positive Social Risks. You want to check out what Chad has been talking about, all of the bundles and the packets and the cards and everything else. You can go to me.and. Did I say? I didn't say that right. we.and.me, as well as you can go to chadlittlefield.com to find out more about that. You can also go to BeTheTalk.com. I'll have a link to his websites as well as his TEDx talk. And we'll be right back with Chad Littlefield for the final word of advice in just a moment. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. Go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. And we're back with Chad Littlefield. What's your final word of advice for us?
My final word of advice is, if you are asking people to think or do something differently in your talk, you need to practice it yourself on stage, and people need to see you practicing it.
Chad Littlefield, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
It was an absolute blast. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.